Welcome back for another episode of Dollar Bin Digging. This is the video and article that I do for comicbookinvest.com where I talk about those, books you can probably still find tucked away in those cheap boxes, those dollar bins, those discount boxes at your LCS, flea markets, yard sales, half-price books, Goodwills, wherever you're finding your cheap comic books, you can probably find some of these titles based off of some of the recent news, rumors, announcements, things going on in TV and movies, as well as, and most importantly, things going on in this week's new release comics. Hopefully you're enjoying this series as well as everything else here on the channel. Please let me know what you think in the comments down below. Make sure that you like, you subscribe, you hit the alert button so you don't miss anything. Keep telling your friends so we can grow on the channel. And if you want to see this week's selection of books, just hang out for a few seconds after the intro and I will be right back. Alrighty, let's start off this week with the actual comics. So, reading through this week's new release comics, a few things jumped out at me as far as like interesting character first appearances and tie-ins and things like that that I can tell you guys about that you can go and hunt for when you're digging through those cheap boxes this weekend. Hopefully these books are interesting to you because, some of these we might have talked about a few months ago, so it's worth talking about them again for those folks who might not have been watching when we did that originally. So let's see what we got here, starting off with DC, reading through New Gods number 4. Yes, this is a new release this week. We've got New Gods, the Fall of New Genesis here, and inside this book, we see a character that's kind of on the newer end of one of the New Gods. Yes, we can go back to Orion and all of the guys back in the original OG run from the 70s that Jack Kirby created, but since then, there have been a handful of new additions, like this lady right here with her crazy mechanical bow, and I'm talking about a character named Shadowfall. Again, she's a newer addition, and you could find her book probably buried in those boxes out there because it really wasn't that long ago. She first appeared as part of a new crop added here in that Green Lantern New Gods crossover, Godhead. So in that very first issue, part of the new 52 in issue 1, we were introduced to a few of these characters. And the one that kind of stood out most to me was Shadowfall here. And there she is. I mean, she looks a little bit different than she might have then, but that has a lot to do with the art than it does in her character design. But this is a book, again, that you can find out there. This Godhead run didn't last too long. I think it was maybe a dozen or so issues, something like that. But the first one is where we got her showing up first. And this is a book you can, again, find out there for very cheap, with copies selling for like $3 and even listed for under $3 when you look at it. So, again, very cheap, and that's what I'm talking about here. Usually cover price and less type books that you can still find out there that have some interesting first appearances and storylines in them that you may or may not have been aware of before. That's kind of what I'm trying to tip you off and hint you off to give you something else extra to read, because again, you never know. You never know. I'm not saying she's going to be the next big character out there or anything like that, but comics could just be fun, and they could be just worth a read too. Now, moving on over to Marvel, I'm going to switch it up here because honestly, there wasn't a lot this week as far as reading goes. Like, not a lot of characters that kind of fit the criteria of what I'm talking about and what I'm doing here. So pickings were kind of slim. So you'll see what I mean once we get further along in the show, as I have one DC option for you, and this is my Marvel option for you. And this guy we've actually already talked about a few months ago, and that's also what I was kind of referring to at the open there. But new this week, we have Eddie Brock's Carnage number 2. Very early on in the run, so we're still trying to feel it out and see where this book is going to go. But inside this, we get to see that inside this issue, we have Eddie Brock kind of admitting to being a murderer just so he can get close to this police officer that he's looking for and he wants to deal with, because the police officer is not who you might expect, but in fact, it is an old villain here that Carnage is trying to track down so he can take him out, because apparently Eddie made a deal that he would give Carnage a number of lives to keep it sustained. So basically, ongoing murder. So in a Dexter sort of way, he's agreeing to murder murderers. So that's kind of the angle I think they're going here. And the murderer he's going after is this guy right here with the mechanical biometric arm, or whatever you want to call it, Bushwhacker, who, again, we talked about a few months ago because he popped up as just a rando villain in Amazing Spider-Man not that long ago as well. So yes, Bushwhacker is a character with an interesting look, weird power set, but it is not, as I mentioned the last time, one of our favorite, wrestlers from the old days, not that Bushwhacker, this Bushwhacker. And he first showed up in Daredevil 248 to be exact, back in July 1987. And inside this book, while we didn't get, I don't think, his first name revealed until the next issue, we do see that this is Bushwhacker. He's kind of a mercenary, a merc of sorts, still with the same, weird biometric turn his body into weapons sort of powers. This is him right here. So there's our first for Bushwhacker. And this is a cheap book. Again, it's not going to cost you an arm and leg to find this thing. Its copies have sold for as cheap as $1.50 and then like $7, a best offer on $7 as recent examples. And then even available copies are listed for as little as $2, $2.39 and $4.95. Like, not a pricey book. It is the first you can find out there. And if this one's not good enough for you and you really want to have that name drop, you can get the next issue in the run, which also features a good appearance by Wolverine. Fun little face-off between these two from August of 1997. And inside this issue here, we find out that his name is, in fact, Bushwhacker, as he introduces himself to the lady right here. So Bushwhacker gets the name drop here in this next issue. Again, not an expensive book, but a little bit pricier than the other one because of that Wolverine appearance. So you might look to spend more in the $5 to $10 range, as recent sales have shown, or the asking price is also looking for as little as $3, but there are more $7 to $12 type of asks. So again, Wolverine appearance could get you a few bucks more, but I'm telling you, look in those boxes for cheap stuff anyway, and this should be the next issue right there in the run if you find it. Now, before we move on, I just remind any of you out there who haven't tried Whatnot yet, use my link below to sign up, give the app a try, check it out, check out the auctions there, get yourselves a free $15 for your first purchase. That's $15 to spend on whatever you want with whomever you want. No strings attached. You help out the channel, you get yourself something nice for free just for giving it a try. I'm still trying to get myself back onto the platform for another sale, but it's just kind of hard getting organized considering I do a lot of shows already, that the free time to actually go and try to do a show, selling comic books isn't something that I prioritize, but I'll get back to it. If you want to wait and check me out when I do it, I'll keep you guys posted. But for now, like I said, get that $15. You can spend it wherever you like with whomever you like, but you got to use my link down below. Now, with that said, let's move on to Spawn for this week, as we got some fun little callbacks to some characters here as well. Now, one is a book you can find for cheap. The other one could be tougher, but I felt like I want to tell you about it anyway. So we're going to start here with Spawn 362. Inside this book, we get introduced to not only a new villain, this green guy down in front, but a couple of classics here as well. So in the back there, I don't know if he looks familiar to you, but that was one of the original run toys from McFarlane too, when he had those Spawn figures way back in the day that people were chasing. This was a character called Tremor. Yeah, big guy, big horns, big character. Interesting. Part of the early runs of Spawn, and when I say early, I mean the first 100, like the first 100 issues. We're at 362 now, so a lot of those early runs issues could be fine for cheap because they were printed very well, and there were a lot of them out there, and a lot of them kind of hung around throughout the years. So issue like 25, there's a lot of these out there, so you could find these in those cheap boxes. Keep an eye out for newsstands of these particular issues because those usually command a premium, so keep an eye out for those. But in October 1994, in issue 25, we did get introduced to this Tremor character, this big baddie right here. So this is the guy who's now a little, just showing up there in the most recent issue. He shows up more than that, just one panel. It's just he's part of the ongoing storyline. Anyway, first appearance all the way back there. And as I mentioned, this is a book that doesn't go for all that much in comparison. Some Spawn issues are very pricey. And even the one of the ones I'm going to talk about in a little bit is a little pricier. This is more the range that you can easily find in those cheap boxes. Because you can see here, copies selling for like $4, $8, listed for like $3 to $7. Not expensive at all. Again, there's a lot of them, so it's not like it's a rare book, but keep an eye out for that newsstand because those newsstands can sometimes get you at least double what the regular market is on that direct. Now, also inside this issue, while not necessarily a villainous character, it is a character callback that we haven't seen for quite some time, or at least I haven't seen in quite some time, and that is another version of Spawn, as we have this futuristic version of Spawn here. Granted, I'm not up to date on reading the regular Spawn title, so I can't tell you half of what's going on right now. All I can tell you is about these characters that we've seen before. And this guy here is one that we've seen before, all the way back to, the 90s as well. This is Spawn, the Daniel Lalonzo version of the character. Again, it was a futuristic one, different take, separate spin-off Spawn title from back in the day that headlined and started off in that first issue of Curse of the Spawn. So this was from September 1996, and this character here is the one that we're seeing brought back up into today's, today's comics. But there you go, boom. This version of a Hellspawn, this version of Spawn, first showed up here in this first issue of this title. Also a book you could find out there. I know I've seen this plenty of times because everybody wanted the regular Spawn title. Those spin-offs weren't really that popular back in the day, so they littered those cheap boxes for a while. Granted, today maybe you can sell it for a few bucks, but examples still show that copy sold for $3.50 for the individual first issue, and then a lot of issues 1 through 4 was only $10 at auction there. Copies listed $5, $9, $10. Not a pricey book at all, so one you can definitely find on those discount bins. Now, those are two characters with very cheap books that you can probably find when you go digging for Spawn. Because like I said, there's a lot of Spawn books that are hard to find. We're not going to get into all the low-run, low-print stuff, but there was a good stretch there a few times in those late 100s and in those early 200s where the book was kind of teetering on, is it going to keep going? Print run was way down. But with that said, there are also other versions of Spawn that have popped up, as you guys probably know, of Gunslinger Spawn, etc., throughout the years that have really hit, and those books are very, very pricey. While this character is not as pricey as those, his first still is kind of pricey, and that is this Spawn right here, the Mandarin Spawn. Sort of a Shogun-esque kind of character that calls back from quite a ways now. Anyway, so Mandarin Spawn here. I like the design. It is a really cool look. It was a really cool look from the start. And he's been around for a while. Again, not a ton of appearances throughout the years, but that first appearance is one that, if you're lucky enough to find it, can get you a good chunk of change. So I'm just going to tell you about it anyway, even though the chances of you finding this for $1 are very slim. I am completely aware of that. I just still want to give you information so you can do with it what you will. But this particular issue of Spawn, with the cover basically the same as that image, was from March of 2007. So nearly 20 years ago, not quite, but in issue 165, we got introduced to this version of Spawn. Because again, in this range, we started getting new Spawns being brought down throughout the years as they kind of made Spawn to be more of a character, like a mantle that was being passed down throughout the ages. But inside this issue, apart from he's obviously there on the cover, yes, inside we get the character in here as well. So Mandarin Spawn, this book, like I said, is pretty pricey because it is not easy to find, and it has a little bit of a draw considering it is the first of a new a version of Spawn that we have seen recurring for some time. But yes, copies could sell cheap. I mean, look, one sold for as little as $12. That ain't bad when you compare the other sales were for $85 and $100. Yes, this could be a $100 book. And you see copies listed for $70, $75, $90. It has been more listed than that. Some, triple digits, some, more than $100 out there. That's what people are asking for. But who knows? Maybe you get lucky. Maybe you somehow stumble into this out there. Just letting you know, giving you that information so you can do with it what you want. Now, as I mentioned, pickings were kind of slim for the new release book, so I'm going to pivot over to some news items to wrap us up for the day. But before we get there, I also want to remind you guys that if you need any supplies, like me, I like to use BCW, bags and boards, short boxes, long boxes, CGC boxes, top loaders, pages for your cards, top loaders for cards, whatever you need to keep your comics and or collectibles safe. BCW probably has a product for you. And if you want, you can use my code down below, RENA10, and save yourself 10% off your entire order. So that's 10% off your whole order. Save a few bucks because you got to buy some of this stuff anyway to keep your collectibles safe. You might as well save some money while you do it. So there's no harm in using my code if you're going to place an order. So you can use the link if you want, but just definitely use that code RENA10 and save yourself a few bucks, and you help out the channel and you get to save some. So really nothing to lose there as well. And with what I was just saying out of the way, let's get on over to those news stories that I needed to kind of pad the show to this week. Because again, a lot of the books didn't have characters that fit my criteria. There was a lot of characters that some big names, so their firsts are not cheap and not easy to find, etc. So we had to pivot on over to some news items. Now, these are some news items from the last week or two. So, bear with me in case she's like, that's not new or that's not interesting. I find it interesting. So it's just reminding me of books that you can go and look for if you're so inclined. Starting off with talk about Captain America. So the last Captain America movie, again, I thought it was pretty good. I know it didn't do great as far as the box office returns of past MCU movies, and maybe, critics maybe didn't love it as much, but I thought it was better than I had planned on it being. Like, I was going in with pretty low expectations, so I was pleasantly surprised when I saw this film. But in recent interviews, Giancarlo Esposito was talking about how much they had changed with the movie and the script, and he was actually hired initially to play a different character that he ended up being, because he ended up being Sidewinder, but originally they wanted him to be cast as King Cobra. Yeah, right there, right next to Magneto. And it'll make sense why Magneto's pictured there too, because he's not Magneto. Don't get lost in those rumors right now either, but King Cobra. Now, the character of Cobra goes back a ways. We're talking way, way back in a Journey into Mystery, and I don't feel like digging through. You're not going to find that. You're not going to find Journey. I think it's issue 98. You're not finding that for $1, so I'm not even bothering with that one. The version of him where he becomes King Cobra happened much later in the Acts of Vengeance storyline with Magneto in this issue and on the cover. So that's where our tie to Magneto, I guess, is here. But with issue 367 of Captain America, the main storyline here with the Acts of Vengeance, etc., didn't have Cobra in it. It was more the backup feature, the next storyline in there, where, yes, we had Cobra and then the Serpent Society being reformed, and he decided to go by, henceforth, you're going to be calling me King Cobra. So that's where we get the start of King Cobra, which is why I've decided to put this book in here. Now, with that said, you could find this one out there. As you can see, Acts of Vengeance was a fun storyline. I remember it way back in the day because it kind of tied in time-wise with me when I enjoyed like the Secret Wars type of toys, etc. So all these things back then kind of have a good sense of nostalgia for me. But this book, $2, $4, recent sales, copies listed for $3, $4, $5. Not a pricey book at all, and definitely one you could find out there if you wanted to go dig for it. So, again, I'm not saying that anything is going to come out of this. If you just want some more Serpent Society characters, here's one you can go and find when Cobra decided to become King Cobra. It's just a fun book to have. Now, another storyline here actually ties into a book that came out 2 weeks ago. And we're in the midst of wrapping up the X-Manhunt storyline where Charles Xavier kind of broke out of his prison in Grey Malkin, and then he's running amok because he's got something to do. It's really the reason of why he broke out. That was this news story. I found it over on, I think it was Comic Book Resources. But anyway, so Marvel reveals why he broke out in that Uncanny X-Men issue 11 that came out, like I said, I think it was 2 weeks ago. So it wasn't even really last week. I think it was the week before, because last week was regular X-Men. And then this week we just had like X-Force and maybe the Exceptional X-Men. Point being, 2 weeks ago, Uncanny X-Men number 11, we get it revealed that Charles Xavier is breaking out to save his daughter here. So he was hooked up. He's got, the big Cerebro helmet on or whatever, locked up, and he's seeing images of his daughter, Xandra Naramani, about basically a coup being that's going to be instigated against her, I guess, if you will. So she's going to be overthrown there because she was kind of like the made to be heir of the Empire when they kind of cloned his DNA with that of Landria, the Empress of the Shi'ar back to it's comic book stuff. I don't want to get too lost in the weeds in the history of how that all came and played out, but it's her here, and he's breaking out so he can go and save her. Here again, further on in the story, we see it doesn't matter. All that matters now is I rescue my daughter. So Chuck, he's on his way out, and that's the whole basis of this X-Manhunt story. Everybody's hunting him down now. And going back to the character that we're talking about, it is the character of Xandra Naramani, if I'm saying that even remotely correct. Now, one would think, considering the Shi'ar and their ties to the X-Men go all the way back to, the Starjammers, and was that like issue 120, 121 thereabouts, you would think maybe we're going to go back that far. But no, she actually was a creation more in modern times, and not even in the regular X title, but in the Rogue Gambit spin-off series, Mr. and Mrs. X. Now, a lot of folks ran for this book a while back because of the first appearance of her character. They thought maybe she would come into play elsewhere. But in September 2018, this issue 3 kind of popped off with her, being here. Boom. So you go, oh, there's for Xandra. Call me Xandra. Yes, we get to see her. She reveals herself, etc. But when I say reveals herself, is that she didn't look like this at the start of this issue. In the start of this issue, she looked kind of like a younger version of Rogue here, because they made the storyline about, well, she must have telepathic abilities, so she's mirror reflecting what would be comfortable for you to see, and you guys being, Rogue and Gambit, you would be more comfortable in recognizing her as maybe your, spawn, or your child. Point being, she came out of a metal egg, and I'm going to get to that in a second, but that's how the storyline starts. She looks like a young Rogue, and then she reveals that she looks more like her mom, Lilandria. Anyway, this issue, like I said, popped off once before. It was like 10, 15 bucks, up to 20, etc. These days, well, there are some $5 copies, some near $10 copies selling. Copies listed are 10, 13, 15, still in that range. As people are still, looking for that old spec kind of hanging around there. So if you find one, maybe you get yourself a couple of bucks. But just also remember that, yes, we did see the reveal of the character, but I pointed out that she originally looked like Rogue, right? Well, that version, or that character, even though she looked like Rogue, actually started off at the end of last issue. So let's not forget this either. Everyone points to this issue because, oh, there's a Deadpool cover on it, and that's how they sell it. They're like, oh, the Mr. and Mrs. X, Rogue, Gambit, and Deadpool. But also, at the end of this issue, again, August 2018, out of the egg, I told you, there was like a metal egg thing, and then, because again, she was kind of cloned or created. She comes out of the egg. So this is her. This is the character, despite the fact that she looks like Rogue. This is still Xandra. It's revealed in the next issue who she is, but this is still technically her. So this is technically her first appearance. Cameo, whatever you want to call it. I'm not getting into semantics here. That's not the point. That's not what I'm trying to argue about. I'm just trying to point out the fact that this is another option for you to look at when you're out there digging, because it often gets overlooked. Copies of this one only sell for like $2.70. Yes, there's a $10 sale there, just as an example. And there are some listed for like $9 to $12. And even some do list that cameo appearance of Xandra, but many do not. So it's just another option for you want to keep an eye out for both if you can. So you get the whole storyline, but you also get both the cameo and the reveal, etc. if you are looking into, look for this character. Now, I told you it was kind of a rough week as far as pickings go for me. So hopefully next week's selection of new comics gives me more fun stuff, or, news or TV shows. Because I thought about kind of tying in some other things. But at this point, having to do this show late on doing it Saturday, I wasn't able to connect the dots with the Starship Troopers for you guys before people already started buying those Starship Troopers books. So yes, dig for Starship Troopers because of the news that Neil Blomkamp is going to be adapting it. But I didn't feel right putting it in the news after the fact, considering I knew I was going to be doing Dollar Bin Digging on Saturday this week because of my work schedule. My day job kept me busy on Thursday, so hopefully next Thursday I get this back out on the regular time. But once again, I dropped this on a Saturday. It seemed to work last week, so hopefully it works again. Maybe I'll just move it to Saturdays. I don't know. Just kind of playing with the schedule, playing with my schedule, and seeing what I can get out there for you as content-wise goes. Now, with all of that said, I do want to thank you for stopping by and checking this out. Hopefully, I gave you some, interesting books for you to go and hunt. It felt like a short week to me, like even the books and putting this deck together, it felt a little light, but maybe next week will give me something more to work with. And with that said, I will see you all soon with some more content, and take it easy. All right, bye.